I'll put it up on the website when it's done. Okay, cool. Here's a question. What unique services or approaches have you seen provide value in the commissioning service? I can restate that if you want.
Yeah, could you please?
Sure. So what the question is, what unique services or approaches have you seen provide value in the commissioning process?
So one of the things that we've been talking about at the U of A is looking at how to integrate persistent technology into the commissioning process. And I noticed in the some of the submitted questions, there's something about automatic fault detection and diagnostics and the commissioning, and that's a good example. So I've been trying to encourage an early adoption of automatic fault detection as a construction concurrent monitoring based commissioning tool. And the value there, one of the values that I see, is the earlier that we have automated systems that are persistently interrogating a building automation system, collecting data, and being annotated by a commissioning provider or project team, the earlier we've started the life cycle master record of that building's performance. I mean, commissioning is always about filling in the gaps that are in that traditional design, build, occupy mode. And one of the big challenges for the commissioning process, and has been, is being able to document that whole life cycle of the design construction and make it an occupied O&M tool for the owners. Well, by deploying software, whether it's commissioning project management software, fault detection and diagnostics, even just the trend data in the BMS itself, the earlier that gets stood up and is starting to be collected and analyzed and annotated, the earlier we now have a life cycle record of the building, and the earlier the O&M we can get past that inevitable kind of day two feeling of figuring out what this building that we've just been provided with is actually capable of doing and what we can expect from it on a day-to-day.
Yep. Brandon, I'm sure you can kind of chime in a little bit more on the whole monitoring, FDD. Banner's got a whole suite of that on their facilities.
Right, and I'm starting to see a lot of value in that. A lot of times if a project, maybe a budget's a little tight on constraints, obviously we all know commissioning has a ton of value, but it's hard to justify sometimes. So if it's something as simple as just upgrading a single air handler using that fault detection platform to maybe do some sort of remote performance assessment, almost like a commissioning light, has a ton of value, not only from a budget standpoint, so the PMs love it, right? I'm not tanking their budget, but we're also still getting eyes and ears on it and still get kind of that deficiency list out of it. And by the time we turn it over, it should be running as it should. And obviously using the same platform for seasonal checks, right? Doing your guys' back checks. So ton of value there, ton of value.
Jeff?
Yeah, what I see, anything that's going to help engage the facility operators, the actual guys who are going to be maintaining a building, anything that brings them on board, gets them familiar with the systems, the equipment, anything that helps with that transition period to ownership, to me, is extremely valuable.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Any questions from the audience, or I'll just keep running down the line? Chime in if you would like. Okay. Okay. Oh, got a question just popped in. Go ahead, Thomas.
So just a kind of general question here. I mean, we've talked about the value of commissioning, and I think we all understand that. We can preach it to different owners all day long, but making them understand the value of it. You know, a lot of times when people are building these days, they're looking for these new certifications as far as LEED V4, Green Globes, and things like that. Why is commissioning still such a low point value for these types of certifications when it obviously has a great value to the structure?
Well, I don't know that I'd agree entirely with the premise that commissioning is still a low value to the green building certification. I mean, you cannot get a LEED certification without demonstrating, at least what they call fundamental commissioning. Now, we could argue, and I think just about everybody on this call would agree, that how LEED defines, or what LEED defines as fundamental versus enhanced, is really missing the point. But they do require the fundamental commissioning. I believe Green Globes also has it as a prerequisite. But I mean, my experience in dealing with like our planning, design, and construction colleagues is I think there's still this remnant of a misunderstanding that the commissioning provider is doing something that other people already engaged in the project somehow could otherwise do themselves. And I'm thinking like the design engineer and the mechanical contractor and the GC, that there are a lot of people, and I had this experience when I was on your side of the table as a commissioning provider, where they seem to think that I'm just here so other people don't have to do it and don't see the intrinsic value of a commissioning provider. And I don't know how you overcome that. I think in the owner's field, and I would turn to Jeff and Brandon for their consensus, but I think in the owner's field, you're largely going to find people that get it and people that don't. And the people that get it, I think, are your opportunity. That's where you get to practice value add, because we already understand how important your basic process is. And now let's explore what can we do more with commissioning to increase the value. And the people that don't get it, you're still going to have to beat them over the head with a brick and say, well, I understand you don't get it. You want a LEED building. I have to be here. And you use that as the entry to demonstrate the value proposition.
Todd, you got something to add?
No, I have another question.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll hold a sec. Jeff, any adds to that?
So, I mean, we're a little different in the state of Utah. We have a high performance building standard, which at one point in time basically said earn LEED silver, but we merged away from that because we wanted to emphasize energy efficiency commissioning, enclosure commissioning. We still have some institutions that still want to pursue LEED. Our HPBS is very similar to LEED. We still have most of the same points of sustainability. But in my mind, and as we're rolling through design, the mechanical systems, enclosure systems, those things really kind of take the top priority in what our discussions and what we're doing. So we're just a little different that way, and we place a high value on commissioning across the board.
True. And Jeff, if you don't mind, I'm going to put a link into this chat for the high performance building standard. So Mike, it's available to you, and Brandon, you guys have it. And for anybody else outside, it is, excuse me, it is the guide that, we do use up here in Utah. So thanks, Jeff. Todd, you had a question?
Yeah. What are some of the operational challenges you guys experience after building occupancy that maybe as commissioning providers we can try to do more before everyone's gone from the site? I know a lot of instances, one of the biggest battles I have is they're performing training on systems that aren't complete or, fully functional tested or validated. What can we help with that, from an owner's perspective? Because it comes from both angles, right? from an owner, you got to push, you want your training done on a complete system. And, we're trying to make that happen, but it seems to happen way before things are even ready to be trained on.
I always find having two sets of trainings on a project is critical, right? There's always that gap where the local facilities teams have to be able to manage that system for at least a time period until everything's said and done. And, you get feedback that they're in the dark, they don't know what's going on. So you want that upfront training, at least a high level overview, and then a kind of deeper, more in-depth one once everything's complete. I try to do both on the projects.
I'm trying to think. I'm thinking of the things that we've seen when we've inherited buildings, because the challenge for me to answer that is when we build at the University of Arizona, especially under planning and construction, there's a 2-year warranty period during which largely we try to keep our hands off the buildings because we don't want to violate anybody's warranty. So we are oftentimes inheriting a building that has been online for 2 years, may or may not have been adequately managed or maintained or warranty issues responded to. And then all of a sudden we get a bunch of stuff. A couple of things, turnover is a big one, like, talking about training, like Brenda was mentioning. I think the model of the contractors are going to come in and stand up a GoPro and do a quick little walkthrough of here's a VAV and here's an air handler and here's where you change the filters. Those don't work anymore. The best trainings that we've seen in recent history were actually led by the engineers of record who came in and spent basically an entire day and walked our O&M staff through the basis of design. What are the sequences supposed to do? Why are we doing this? What's the outcome? And that's something that I think commissioning providers might want to try to incorporate into their reporting and communications. A lot of times on a new project, we'll learn what's being put in, where it's being put in, and how it's going to function. But the understanding of why these systems were chosen and why the building is expected to do a certain performance sequence is left out of the communication, where the commissioning provider, on the assumption you've been brought in early enough that you've had a chance to interact with the design process, may have a better understanding of why is this building supposed to function, especially if you're involved with the OPR, which is we all know it's a key document, but I would say as an owners, we don't put enough emphasis on taking ownership of a comprehensive and effective OPR, and we certainly don't give you guys enough time or attention in developing one, because you being able to give it to reflect back an OPR to us and say, here's why this building has or doesn't have economizer, is using pressure independent valves or is using typical valves, is using electric reheat versus hydronic, and here's the rationale, and here's what you should expect the building to do and why it's going to do it. I think that closes the gap between strictly saying this equipment works per design and here's how and why you're going to operate the building the way you are.
I can tell you that I just did a project here in the Utah, and I actually walked with the operational staff and did the whys. So yeah, that proved very valuable to the operating staff. Great. Any questions from Todd Rinsdale? I'm gonna not put you on the spot, but I mean you're an envelope guy from Intertech, right? Any questions on envelope? I mean, okay.
Todd who?
Todd, oops, I just saw the first one. I think that was you.
Okay. No, I'm not an envelope guy.
Oh, I thought you were.
No.
Okay.
So.
Oh, Thomas. Never mind. Thomas.
Yes, sir. I'm the envelope guy from Intertech.
You're the envelope guy. You know, it's just so we don't, I mean, so we get a good flavor, right? I mean, we can talk mechanical, electrical systems and plumbing systems all day long. Is there any questions from an envelope perspective that you might have?
Not really at this point. Like, you know, I asked that first question about the point system with the, you know, lead and green globes. You know, I think pretty obvious about how the envelope has to work with the mechanical system for the building to perform properly. You know, when I stated my question earlier, I probably should have said, you know, I'm down here in the Arizona area too, where we're having a hard time with these, you know, pushing people toward the, you know, more energy efficiency and stuff like that, except on the universities and healthcare systems and stuff like that. So, yeah, I've done a lot of work up in the Utah area with our Utah office up there. I know BYU has an extensive program for commissioning, one of the higher air leakage requirements that we've seen anywhere. But no general questions.
Okay. So here's one that I know has come up in several of the conversations I've had as we get towards the end of the project or the end of the construction time. So there's also a very large project going on here in the state of Utah that it's come up a few times. But so there's been some discussions about, you know, tab contractors are always hired by the mechanical. And should the tab contractor be, like the commissioning provider, be hired by the owner? Or do you see any conflicts with that? I mean, what are your guys' questions on or answers towards that?
Well, I've been quiet for a minute. I guess I can take a stab at that. But so my opinion on the tab side is that really that's a contractual deliverable. I mean, that's something that needs to be done, you know, just in conjunction with the installation of the mechanical systems, those kind of things. To me, that's a contractor provided thing rather than like an owner oversight, commissioning, making sure. I mean, it does have its place in making sure things run right, but to me, it's more of the actual delivery of the system. So to me, that falls on the contractor definitely, and not on the owner.
So it's interesting because I actually would disagree with Jeff on this. Not in the sense that it's it's certainly integral to the delivery of the systems, but I think test and balance is the circle in the middle of the Venn diagram that ties mechanical installation and commissioning together. And from my purely personal opinion, I've always felt that test and balance best serves the project when it's frankly independent of the mechanical contractor and doesn't have a dog in the mechanical contractor's fight, if you will. I've always been a proponent of the commissioning authority or the commissioning provider being direct to the owner. And if it can't be direct to the owner, it's got to be at least direct to the design build, the very, very highest contract level. I did a lot of military construction work in my career, and the owner never takes ownership. The military never takes ownership of the commissioning. They always say to the design build prime, you're going to own the commissioning, but they're going to report to us. So let's set up a conflict of interest right out of the gate. But I've always been a big proponent for test and balance and frankly controls to at a minimum be primed to the design build. If the owner can take the tab, I think it's not necessarily a bad idea, but leaning a little bit back towards Jeff's point about they have to be part of the project deliverable, I think tab and commissioning or tab and controls and commissioning should belong to the prime contractor whose only contractual relationship is with the owner. Their only fight is to deliver the project at maximum value, on time, on or under budget. And that's where tabs really coming into play. So my feeling is they should definitely not be under the mechanical contractor, even though we know 95% of the time that's the delivery model.
Sure.
Yeah, I could see it both ways. I'm fine with it being underneath the mechanical contractor, but there's always got to be that piece at the end. You know, the owner should be at the table when we're reviewing deficiencies, making sure everything's signed off and reviewed, and whether that's as a team or if it's just emailed on the sideline, I think either is fine. But it's definitely important that the as an owner, I'm in the loop, if you will. But I don't see, or I have not personally experienced any tap contractors kind of doing anything nefarious on the side. And plus with, the getting integrated into the fault detection platform, it's really easy to kind of see that if they were, so I don't think they kind of get away with it for very long if they were to try to do that, and that would be at their detriment. So I don't have any concerns with that being underneath the contractors. So.
Got a question from the audience. Greg, you want to shout out?
Oh, yeah, that was just, thanks, Vince. It was just more of a quick comment that, circling back on that training, how do we provide better training or, on that regard? And I just made that comment that we recently had a project where there was several members from the facility operations team that sat in with us during testing, and they were actually sitting at the BMS, clicking set points and running through test scripts. And it ended up being a really great opportunity for training.
Great.
Yeah, to me, that's the gold standard. It's not, not always feasible, but man, that would be awesome if that could always happen.
Yeah, and it doesn't always. So just to tie this in a little bit, Mike, I know you were a proponent of having tab and controls. I do know in September we had, or October, we had the BCA annual conference in Toronto, and there was an owner there, and I think his direction is that the commissioning provider is actually going to do the design for the controls, is his or their direction. So stay tuned. I think there's more coming on that, but let me just drop that into your lap for a little bit. I mean, there was a lot of pros and cons to that conversation, but yeah, just I can talk to you more about that offline if you'd like. Just reach out to me and we can have that conversation. So here's another question here, I think, and this goes a little bit along the lines of the FDD, right? So how are you as facility, or how are you facilitating the merger of commissioning process and the early activation of automatic fault detection? And what do you see as pitfalls and strengths? And I think we touched a little bit of that, but what do you see some of the pitfalls, I guess? We all know the strengths of having FDD on a project. I'm kind of looking along the lines of like, what do you see as the pitfalls? So let's take the other angle of that.
So I have a feeling this question showed up on your list because I was going to be on the call, because we've recently just did exactly this. We did a retrofit of our one of our astronomical sciences buildings, the observatory building, and it was a complete retrofit of mechanical systems and obviously the BMS. And by virtue of it being an existing building with an existing IP infrastructure, we were able to bring the fault detection in very early. And we started by saying to the controls contractor, we'd like you to turn your normal installation process upside down. And rather than going out to the terminal equipment and the air handlers and starting with sensors and devices and field controllers, start with the JACE and get the JACE on the wall and get it commissioned and have a database ready so that we can link it up with our AFDD provider. And as soon as your points are proxied into the JACE, we can see them and ostensibly start to follow them. The problem, the big pitfall, is whoever is looking at the AFDD at that time frame, be it a commissioning provider, an energy manager, the contractor, whomever, really has to swim through a lot of noise to find the signal, because you're using a tool as part of commissioning whose accuracy relies on the system having been commissioned, right? It's almost like a catch-22 that you're intentionally setting yourself up to swim through. And so you have to be willing, I think, to understand that you're going to get analyses out of your fault detection that may be legit because the equipment hasn't been fully commissioned yet, or is responding to other changes upstream in the system that hasn't been commissioned yet, or it's making assumptions about a sequence of operations that is actually in flux. There's a lot of noise through which you have to find the signal, and you have to be willing to absorb that time and effort. Not only you, the commissioning provider or the owner, but your project team has to be willing to absorb that. You have to have contractors that are aware up front that this is going to put garbage on the plate, and they are willing to partner with you without throwing change orders, or without it impeding the rest of their work. So that's that can be a big mountain to climb, and it all depends on the relationships and how well can you plan for this? How well do you have the fault detection ready to go? If you're using a third-party software service like we do, then hopefully I'm able to work a lot of that stuff out in advance with our FDD onboarding team. If you're, I think like Banner, where it's a locally hosted or a locally managed FDD library, then Brandon's got to put somebody to task doing that upfront and being ready to pivot to it. So there are values to it. I'm a firm believer that there are values to using AFDD as a construction concurrent, but it's only going to work with a lot of advanced planning and everybody knowing that it's that signal through the noise kind of paradigm.
Yeah, and if I'm hearing you right, I mean, I see this as a very early discussion during the design, and even I think even into the procurement of the submittals, and having this almost like having a pre-installation conversation with a controls contractor and the team, as well as the commissioning provider, and maybe even the third-party FDD analytics platform, and just saying, hey, this is the approach that we have taken. Help us out, right? And so then you are not making false sparks per se, right? And really just kind of diving into the meat and potatoes and kind of throw the broccoli or the Brussels sprouts off the plate, right? Okay, cool, thank you. Since no one else is offering to chime in,
I'll chime in on that one. I like the noise. I mean, noise or even garbage, if you will, has value, right? So, I mean, even if it's something that's affecting it from, as you said, downstream or outside of it, that is something that would probably affect it at some point once it's turned over. So, I mean, all of that has value, even if when you're evaluating the system and a point's mapped wrong or a vendor isn't ready, again, has value. It didn't get incorporated into the system properly. I think the biggest pitfall is timing and scheduling, right? Because everybody's always stacked on top of each other, and there's no sense in asking a commissioning agent to evaluate it and start commissioning, but controls guy is not ready, or there's no power to the unit. So I really think it just boils down to timing and maybe even as owners allowing that time within the schedule, right? We all want it up and running, as fast as we can humanly get it, as fast as we can possibly get it, but it doesn't make sense, and did we afford people the time to do it properly? So.
And I think even to that, Brandon, I mean, is engaging the IT department as quickly as possible, because I mean, that is a huge factor that is going to drive it as well, right? And is there provisions, like if you don't have the server, the IT switch online, are there other devices that can be used to host any sort of FDD platform, or at least get it to a server somewhere? So. And again, that goes back to Mike. I mean, that's the cost, right? I mean, can we absorb the cost?
And it's also a question of, can you even get the infrastructure in? So at the U of A, rigid cabling, the university networking is not provided by the capital construction team. It's provided by University IT Services, who comes in at the 11th hour with their contractor. So our Division 26 contractor will put in cable tray and conduit and get them the route from points A through whatever to the server room or to switchgear. But it's the UIT's contractor, when everything else is essentially done, that's actually making terminations. So anything in that building that's going to rely on an IP connection out of the building is on hold. And for us, that includes BAS, that includes any kind of fault detection, that includes everybody's, laptops and computers. Everything's waiting on university IT at that point. So unless you have a controls contractor that is willing to absorb or has been contracted to stand up and maintain an ad hoc network to get their signal out to the world, it's all planning and no execution until we get those terminations from UITs, from University IT.
Yep.
Well,
So what is I,
this touches on an issue that we're talking about a lot right now, and Vince, this could be interesting to you, but with our new version of our high performance building standard, we're requiring essentially the commissioning agents to perform 12 to 24 months of monitoring based commissioning post project to track our EUI targets, or energy use targets, and when does that start, right? I mean, how quickly can we start to get really good data to really create a baseline to start comparing against over those 12 to 24 months? So that's a big question for us. How do we get there? Does it fall on me? Does it fall on the commissioning agent to push the contractor, to push the controls people, to push whatever needs to be pushed to get that stuff up and running as early as possible to start to create some kind of a baseline to measure from? I mean, going into this, I didn't think that would be a big deal, but it's turning out to be kind of a big topic of conversation.
so maybe this goes, Jeff, this goes a little bit back to the one of the earlier questions, right? And just about the communications, right? And an open line of communication. I see this as more of an open line of communications, right? But this is where I think on the owners, right? Because I've been involved in several projects where we're late to the table, right? We're there for dessert and not the main meal, right? So is having those conversations early and often and with everybody so that we do have some sort of network and kind of maybe do that proverbial line in the sand of saying, okay, we know that substantial completion is X. However, there's other challenges, what is, Jeff, right? Like, then what is that line in the sand? Where do we start that 24 months, right? So yeah, good, great. Todd, did I see your hand up? Todd Watson?
Yeah, I had another question. Kind of plays into this whole last question is, as owners, have you guys had discussion of tying commissioning to substantial completion? And I know one of the biggest owners in California is Kaiser, and at the conference, they had discussed how they have done that and they're doing that. And I think that would help drive a lot of that, because technically substantials, when they start up the equipment and have a balance report, there's a lot that still has to happen for weeks and months after that just to get the building operational.
Yeah, and that's a really good question, and definitely touches on what I was just talking about because it's part of the same conversation. We would love it if we can get to a certain level of commissioning. I don't know what that would be, since our commissioning contracts typically extend 12 months to even 24 months now, past the substantial completion. But how do we define that level of completion? Is it tied to the issues log? Is it tied to a certain level? I don't know. But that's something we're talking about. And going back on is the FDD system, or is the metering, is all that stuff working at substantial completion? And how, like with us, I'm coordinating commissioning, I'm coordinating the building performance side of things, but I'm not the project manager. I'm not the one signing the pay apps. And so I don't really have a direct connection in there to say, hey, whoa, we should be holding some payment here. So we're, how do we set that up to where we can actually have some influence at substantial completion and whether we're there or not, and whether the contractor is getting paid? I mean, we don't have answers yet, but these are all big questions we're talking about.
Yeah, because they like to get off site quickly, and that's where things become challenging.
Yeah, we're in an interesting situation because the university is its own AHJ. So substantial completion and permitting is when the responsible entities at the university determine it is. So I have seen projects on campus issued substantial occupancy, and commissioning is got a ways to go. And that in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. I've been on projects as a commissioning provider, and I've worked with commissioning providers on projects on campus where we say, you know what, we know you have functional testing to do. The nature of that functional testing will not prevent us starting to occupy and take ownership of the building. And it's in everybody's best interest to hit a substantial occupancy point and not hold it up and not put commissioning on a critical path. So we will go ahead and issue substantial occupancy with everybody's understanding that you're not really done until the commissioning gets done. And so there's arguments for and against it. And I think it ultimately goes back to, as everybody knows, the real crux of the success or challenge of any of these construction projects and the commissioning of them is communication and relationships. If I, as an owner's rep on a project, have a firm confidence in my head that I can rely on, and I have a trust in the integrity and of the project team, then there's certain flexibility that I might be willing to share with them, because there are certain things like, I mean, look, everybody's having problems getting materials right now. We have our own project going on where they lost probably about 2 months of progress waiting on various steel and structural components that have now pushed on everybody's schedule. But by virtue of the relationship we have with these contractor teams, we are actively looking for ways to work with them. So one of those ways, because I'm actually the commissioning provider on the project, is that I've already told them we will not, barring anything that you guys do to screw up the schedule. But if it's simply because you've slipped because of force majeure, if you will, I will advocate on your behalf to not have commissioning hold up your substantial completion. Now, this is because facilities is moving into the building. The facilities management's energy manager is the commissioning provider. So this is somewhat unique, but you can find within the construct of a good relationship between all the players, that flexibility, that willingness to share the load of how do we complete. It doesn't happen all the time. And I don't think it's ever a guarantee, even with a project team and an owner that have worked together in the past. But it all drills back to communication. If everybody knows where everybody stands through the life of the project, and nobody's getting surprised and nobody's getting the knife in the back and being held accountable for things that are either beyond their control or really not their scope or our shared responsibility, and everybody knows where we're trying to get to, then everybody's going to be more willing, including the owner, I think, to be an active participant and advocate for getting there together.
Brandon, any comments or?
Yeah, I think just kind of dovetailing with what Jeff said, it's going to be the challenge. You know, we're not the PM. I think it's going to be a heavy lift. It'd really be changing more of a mindset than trying to, you know, convince them that thought process. But it would definitely be an uphill battle. I see the value in it. That would take some time and definitely kind of changing the mindset of the players and the organizations.
Cool. So, got 9 minutes left. So kind of one last question, unless there's any from the audience, but what are some of the pain points or challenges with the commissioning process that as owners you see that we as providers can do better at? Does that make sense?
Said pain in the process?
Yeah. So yeah, what are some pain points in the commissioning process that we maybe I'm coming at this from a BCA's perspective, like what can we as the BCA do better on, or maybe is there a part of the process that we need to improve on, maybe clarify a little bit, change it slightly? There are best practice, we've been, as a BCA, we've been developing the best practices. So on our website, on the BCA's website, there are 3 different, best practices for existing building, new building, and now ongoing commissioning. What are some of the things as owners that you have seen that just going, ooh, I wish we wouldn't have done that? Or is there a different way that we can approach, right? Because we all know design, construction, acceptance, warranty. Is there something else that we can, as a collective group, do better?
I think Jeff hit on something about what they're doing in Utah that is worth the industry starting to emulate. And if I heard Jeff correctly, he said that they are requiring ongoing post-occupancy monitoring-based commissioning for a period of time after substantial completion. So one of the things, and I think my kicking back a pain point creates a pain point for the providers, but I think a lot of owners, especially non-institutional, like with Jeff and Brandon and myself, you're dealing with owner groups that are we're experienced at working with commissioning providers. The kinds of projects and the volume of work that we do have made us experienced in the process. Smaller entities that don't do this on a regular basis don't know what questions to ask. So maybe it's valuable in commissioning providers beginning to engage with their clients early on about commissioning is not just, it's not even anymore just from conceptual. It used to be that the fight for a commissioning provider was to get in early enough to legitimately help with an OPR definition, right? Which is still a struggle, I know, but really you need to stay involved longer now. Where originally it was you need to bring me in earlier, it's you need to bring me in early, but you have to understand that the best value of my work to you is if I stay engaged with the building for that 12 to 24 months. Sure. So it might be planning for how to incorporate an FDD where one doesn't already exist with an owner, or how to incorporate into the commissioning process the onboarding of like Brandon's SkySpark or My Clockworks in bringing the new building on and being a partner with that so that you can continue that relationship and offer upfront the same kind of monitoring-based commissioning that Jeff and the state of Utah are requiring, because most owners don't even know to ask for it, much less how to value it. I think that's something that's answering a pain point that a lot of owners don't know that they have.
Sure. Okay. Jeff, Brandon. I see, Marcus, I see you're on. Do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah. Hey guys, sorry, I've been driving the whole time. I didn't want to annoy anybody with road noise. But I have a quick question. Actually, I was just presenting this morning to a contractor, and every time it comes up about the lessons learned, and it's like every time a job starts, it's like the same things happen again and again and again. I've always wondered, it's like, we all do this. We all have our lessons learned. We all basically write them down. It's just like, and just like Mike said about, communication, that's what it is, real about communication, about, relationships, and just that openness about the lessons learned. I sometimes wonder, wouldn't it be great if we just had this big old book that we shared across the country of all the lessons learned that we've actually had on so many different systems, so we can pinpoint them down, like before we even like think about it. You're like, you know what? This always happens, and so does this. Let's just start targeting those now. And it's just funny because it comes up and it goes away almost every week. And how was your thoughts on that, folks? That was my question. What are your thoughts on that, Mike and Brandon and Jeff? Because I wish we could have a big old one. The BCA is created everything else. Might as well have a big old book of lessons learned, huh?
What would be interesting, I think, about that is it's something tangible to an owner. I think with commissioning, there's always this fancy, you know, they don't really understand it. It's not tangible. They buy an air handler, they see it, they touch it, you know, they pay a contractor to come in, they see the result. With commissioning, they may not always understand the results, so in their mind, they don't see it. So I actually find that kind of interesting. I always think with owners in commissioning, there's nothing tangible. So I think that's a great idea.
Well, and Brandon, you know that the BCA on our website, I may share that with you, but through our advocacy committee, we are starting to build a national database about the codes and stuff within the United States. So again, I don't know, maybe Todd Watson, if you're still on, if you can go find that and maybe post that link in this, right? And that's been a great tool. And Tom Poling, if you're still on, I mean, he was a spearheading on that particular project. So, it's one thing that, and Marcus, you bring up a great question, right? It's like, how do we have could we do a national database of some sort of a spreadsheet and saying, here's the lessons learned, post it. I know that we within our chapter are trying to get, and I'm trying to get it off the ground about here's some of the natural issues that we continue to see and what the fixes were so that we can share that within our providers network. And again, I'd like to put that on our website.
We have that with, like, let's say with audits, we perform a lot of them. And so, we have a monster list of ECMs, and so you don't have to like just, oh, what ECM? You're like, what kind of unit? You know what I mean? So you can actually come up with it quick, fast, throw it out there. What is the ROI? Does it pertain? And we all do this internally at our respected firms. But I'm just one of those things where I just believe in, why don't we just throw it out there, create a big old book, and then just kind of run through it, and it would help out the process so much better. And I think the project delivery would be great. But that's just
what I was thinking. Talking about pain points, I was thinking I'm not really aware of anything that I call a pain point in terms of the commissioning process as outlined. To me, the biggest thing that I see is across the state of Utah and all the various state buildings. We see a variety of systems that are being designed. So anything from a standard VAV reheat system to VRF systems, things like that, right? And so what is it? So what I see as the pain, I guess, is how do you best commission like an air-cooled VRF system? What are the things you really have to be looking out for? Where is the time best spent? I'm thinking VRF in particular because we've had some projects where, where maybe the actual observations of the piping, the copper piping, the lines, those kind of things, and testing or overseeing the testing that the mechanical sub should be doing, on those lines, pressure testing, those kind of things, where is the time best spent on a particular system to ensure that the system is going to perform in the end? And those kind of lessons learned, I think, would be pretty valuable to say, okay, here's the different types of mechanical systems that we routinely deal with, and here's where some of the pain points are in the delivery of an efficient, effectively operating system of that type.
Well, Jeff, I can tell you where I wish more money went, and wish we could actually say it, is basically to the design reviews early on and then to the submittal reviews to make sure that everything's checking up. Because, I spend a lot of time, more time than I actually can budget for to be competitive, in the design reviews and all the submittal reviews. Of course, I just did an envelope review. It literally took me 70 hours. I had 350 comments. You know what I mean? And it's just someone's like, oh my God, how long did you do that for? I'm like, I wanted to be thorough, but of course, sometimes we just don't have the hours, you know what I mean? And we don't want to bill the client too much because it's like, but how far, do you go? But if you don't catch it in design, then you're always basically behind the bus. So.
Yeah, that's what I mean by identifying those places where the time is effective, right? Because I totally get that. If we all had if I had my way, we would have a lot more of a budget with commissioning and a lot more on-site presence and a lot more, but we can't. We have to. There's always going to be a balancing between where we can effectively put the commissioning dollars, and what the results are, whether that's with the functional performance testing in the end, whether that's site observations and seeing how the duct sealing is going and how these connections are going and how the pressure testing, you know what I mean? There's so many different things to look at, and to me, that really is important to know, like where should that time be spent? And I think it varies depending on the systems that are being installed.
Awesome. All right, gentlemen. I know we could probably go on for at least 2 to 3 more hours on this, but we are on time. I want to respect everybody's time. It is a Friday. I am late for another meeting. So Mike, Jeff, Brandon, thank you so much for doing this. I do want to let you guys know that our BCA annual conference is in Phoenix next year, September 22nd, 23rd, I think somewhere around that time frame. I do know that there is going to be a owners panel, so I would love to invite the 3 of you to come down. Please reach out to me or reach out to anybody on our board. I definitely do want to let you guys know that it is there, so please come down. Hopefully you can be part of this, and we will go from there. To everybody else that's on the call, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And if there's anything BCA related that you would like to know, please reach out to us. We are always there to help. So thank you so much. With that,
Thanks
have
for
an
having
awesome
us.
weekend.
Yeah.
See you guys.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See y'all.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.